Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for Monday, the 24th of July, 2017. As we take a look across at the Atlantic Basin this afternoon, the visible satellite imagery shows us really not much going on at all. We're in this suppressed phase of the Madden-Julian oscillation all across the Atlantic Basin here. Really just sinking motion, strong upper level winds in some cases, but you can really tell by the lack of deep thunderstorm activity. I mean, the deepest thunderstorms are here over parts of the deep south, Louisiana, Mississippi, etc., not even out here over the ocean. And so this tells us that we have sort of this suppressive mode of the Madden-Julian oscillation, a fancy way of saying it's just not favorable right now, and that's fairly typical for the end of July. And as we get into August, especially mid-August, that's when things typically start to change. Part of this is owed to the Saharan air layer, fairly prevalent still coming off Africa, these large outbreaks of dry and in some cases dusty Saharan air come rolling off, but that too begins to abate some as we end the month. It's a slow process, but boy, once we get into mid-August and especially later August, the natural background state of things begins to change, and we get into a pattern that's more conducive for development. But for the time being, probably the next week or so, the Atlantic Basin is going to be very quiet. Not the case in the Pacific, where we do have Tropical Storm Greg moving off to the west generally, and then in between Greg and Hillary over there to the east, we'll get to that in a second, is Irwin. And you say, well, why are they out of order like that? Well, Hillary formed before Irwin did, and this is Hurricane Hillary, and these two are going to have a very interesting interaction. I'm going to show you that here on the GFS. This is from this morning's run, the 12Z run. Now, let me point out what's what. Usually I don't show this part of the world. This would be the west coast of the United States over here. There's the Baja. There is Mexico and Central America. Here's Hawaii over here, sandwiched right in there. In fact, that's the remnants of Fernanda moving across Hawaii now. Just a low cloud swirl with maybe some added moisture, but that's about it. And this is Tropical Storm Greg. This is Tropical Storm Irwin. And this is Hurricane Hillary over here. These two are the ones that I want you to watch the closest as I put this into motion over the next 7 days. This is 7 days into the future. And watch what happens here. You see, these two start to interact with each other in somewhat of what we call the Fujiwara effect. They can't just run into each other. It doesn't work that way. And so maybe Irwin starts to weaken a little bit because of the proximity to Hillary. Maybe they're going to try to pinwheel around each other. It's hard to say, even over the next 7 days here, but this is going to be an interesting interaction between these two tropical cyclones, maybe eventually leading to the possibility that Hillary ends up here in the last frame. This is 168 hours out, or a week, right? There's Southern California right there, and you know, it's not too far off the coast. So I have to watch that. Obviously, you know, water temperatures up here are colder than they are down in the tropics, but you know, that's a lot of moisture and some energy that's headed possibly for Southern California. But we really need to see how this interaction is over the next few days and how they influence each other, because when you get two tropical systems that close, this phenomenon called the Fujiwara effect, even if it is subtle, where the two of these systems kind of spin around each other about a common axis down the middle, they just generally don't run into each other. If anything, the dominant system will absorb the weaker system, but in this case, both of them seem fairly stout. So this is going to be interesting to watch over the next few days. And again, the possibility, as remote as it is, that maybe Hurricane Hillary, as it weakens, moves north towards California, and that would be something interesting to watch for sure. All right, so we'll see what happens with that. Nothing else, though, to worry about in the Atlantic Basin, and nothing down the road. So I'm going to come back on Wednesday and do an update then. We give it 48 hours to see what happens in the Eastern Pacific and what the possible eventual outcome is between Irwin and Hillary out in that region. Could be an interesting few days ahead. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Again, I'm Mark Sutton for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website. And for Hurricane Pro and HD, I'll talk to you again on Wednesday.